when Saturday Night Live started, you did a little news story that it's going to be celebrating its 40th anniversary next February.
Yes.
But you started to talk a little bit about Saturday Night Live, and I know Say's a big SNL fan.
Right.
And actually, I was parodied once on Saturday Night Live. And
really?
You know who played me?
The man.
The man, Tom Hanks, played Rob Weller.
That is so
I know.
Cool.
Unbelievable. I was sitting in bed in my jammies, and there's Tom Hanks doing Entertainment Tonight parodies.
That is great.
Yeah. But how did that thing kind of get started? What you know a little history on that?
Well, what's interesting is Dick Ebersol and Lorne Michaels came up with this idea to do a show on Saturday night. And they wanted to do a sketch show. And they, first of all, were told by NBC, well, you know what? We have Johnny Carson, and he's got the mighty Carson Art Players, and they do sketches. So I don't think we can do a sketch show. And he said, well, but what? And he said, well, Johnny is a host. Are you going to have a regular host? It's not. We won't do it. Well, I'll have a new host each week. Well, what was interesting is that Lauren was familiar with National Lampoon. National Lampoon had done a live show touring the country. So you had people like Harold Ramis, John Belushi, Gilda Radner.
And they were doing this live, city to city kind of a thing.
Absolutely.
And they had some albums out, too.
Right.
On Columbia or Epic, I think.
And that came later, the radio show. And he had the idea, hey, I'll have them. I'll make a deal with National Lampoon. But they wouldn't do it. So he just had open auditions, and lo and behold,
the same guys came in.
The same guys came in. Well, but what was interesting was it wasn't called Saturday Night Live in the first year, because there was another show on ABC hosted by Howard Cosell.
Oh my God! I interviewed him one time. That was the worst interview I've ever had in my little life.
And he was the host of a show.
That guy was the most acerbic, lousy, rotten guy I've ever interviewed, Jim. Let me tell you.
Someone thought that he was like the next Ed Sullivan or something.
No way. By the way, they said about Ed Sullivan, who used to do the Ed Sullivan Show with the Beatles, that he read everything he ever said. So if you met him on the street and said, Ed, how are you? He'd look over your shoulder and he'd say, don't walk. It's a great Ed Sullivan line. So anyway.
So he was doing a show first. His show was on first. And he had in his cast Brian Murray, Chris Guest, and Brian Murray's brother, Bill Murray.
Huh.
And they were called the Prime Time Players. And the show on ABC was called Saturday Night Live, and it was in prime time. Now, rumor had it that John Belushi was interested in doing that show because it, A, paid more, but B, it was a bigger audience. And they wouldn't have him. So he chose for the creative freedom of Saturday night on NBC. So when they had Saturday Night Live, they said, well, we're not. They're calling themselves the Primetime Players. Well, we'll be the not for primetime players.
Yeah.
So for the first year or two,
Yeah.
it was Saturday night, live from New York. It's Saturday night. And then they were the not ready for primetime players.
Yeah.
And then later, when Howard Cosell's show folded, they turned around and they bought the rights to the name.
Now, by the way, the only complaint I have is there's so many kids in the cast that it takes them like 20 minutes to get into the first sketch.
Right, and about
featuring
yes.
Johnson Barber.
That was done in about year 3.
Yeah.
When they had first they had featured players, and then they had featured plus extra players.
God.